One of my very favorite and one of the most common novel structures is the multiple storyline structure, which is where we switch between different plot lines with each chapter or section and follow the stories as they progress simultaneously. This could mean that we follow different character points of view across the same time period, or it could mean we're following the same character across two different time periods. Sometimes these storylines intersect in some way, and sometimes they operate wholly independently, specifically if they're taking place in different time periods. It is perhaps the most complex novel structure to write, so today I want to talk through the 5 most common mistakes that I see in novels written with multiple storylines. So if you're writing one of these or thinking about writing one of these, you can check your manuscript against these and ensure that you are fixing these mistakes. If you are writing a novel and maybe in the process of self-editing or interested in thinking about publishing down the line, I recommend subscribing to my channel. I am a professional book editor and I upload a new video every week with either writing tips like this one or advice about how to go about getting your novel published, and I would love to have you around. So let's dive into the first mistake I see with multiple storyline novels, and that is switching storylines too frequently. If you end up switching between your storylines after just a page or so of text, then ultimately the reader is going to feel like we're getting jostled around too much. It's almost like you're on a bumpy roller coaster ride, and we never really feel situated in the narrative. We never feel fully invested in the storylines because we're just switching between them so frequently. It's almost like we're getting some kind of novel whiplash. You want to avoid this by ensuring that you really spend ample time within each storyline so the reader can really get situated, understand the characters, and get invested in each storyline before you move on to the next one. You need to make sure we get the chance to spend a good amount of time in each storyline. Otherwise, the novel is just going to pass us by in a blur. The next mistake is the opposite. It is switching storylines too infrequently. You also want to ensure that you don't sit with a particular storyline for too long, because this will ultimately result in a narrative imbalance. If we're sticking with one storyline for a long time, then the reader is ultimately going to sit there and kind of start ticking the clock and wonder when we are going to switch back to that other storyline that we were also invested in. We're going to crave switching to the next one and seeing what actually is going on in that other storyline. Sticking with one storyline for too long is also going to have an effect on the pacing and make the novel drag. So a general rule of thumb is if you have stuck with a particular storyline for 2 pretty big consequential scenes, then it's probably time to switch to the other one. In many cases, you can probably switch to the other storyline after just 1 consequential scene, so long as that scene isn't just a single page, as I mentioned in the last tip. Now, when you're thinking about establishing the cadence of switching between your storylines, you ultimately want to make sure you are spending as close to equal as possible of the page time on each storyline. So if you typically switch every 10 pages, try to keep that consistent throughout the novel as much as you can. It's okay if there are a few exceptions, but try to keep it as consistent as possible, because as the reader is reading, they're going to register that pattern and come to expect it. So any anomaly is going to throw them off and it's going to feel jarring. At the end of the novel, ideally in each storyline, you will have roughly the same total number of pages dedicated to each one. The third mistake when writing multiple storyline novels is introducing a new storyline too late. When you have multiple storylines that you are balancing, you want to set up the reader's expectations for all of the storylines as early in the novel as possible. Ideally, within the first 20 to 40 pages, you have introduced all of the storylines that you're going to be covering in the entire novel. That's because those first pages of the novel are critical for setting the reader's expectations for what the story is going to include, which characters are important, what plot lines we are following, and where the story is ultimately headed. So you need to signal to the reader as early as possible which storylines you are going to be switching between. If you wait longer than around 40 pages into your manuscript to introduce a new storyline, then you run the risk of it feeling really abrupt and jarring to the reader, because you've already spent all of those critical first pages establishing the other storylines and getting the reader really invested in those. So to suddenly have this other storyline thrown in is going to feel really jarring. The fourth mistake I see with multiple storyline novels is dropping off a storyline. Every single storyline that you choose to include in your novel must have a well-developed beginning, middle, and end. Just as you don't want to randomly introduce a storyline partway through the novel, you don't want to randomly just omit a storyline and have it disappear with no resolution. Because remember, you've made the reader invested in that storyline, so they're going to want to see it the entire way through. For the best balance when it comes to multiple storyline novels, each storyline should begin at the beginning of the novel and end at the ending of the novel. Each storyline should extend the full length of the novel and have its own sense of resolution when you are coming to the closing portion of the novel. So it's almost like making sure you are sending off each individual storyline in a very deliberate and clear way right at the end of the story. I'm not going to say you have to tie everything up because I don't think all endings do need to have things tied up in a bow. However, you do want the reader to get some sense of finality and resolution with each storyline toward the end of the novel. Now, the fifth mistake that I see in multiple storyline novels is just having too many storylines altogether. Sometimes when you've written a novel with multiple storylines, the truth is that you've actually written multiple novels in one. Especially if your novel is over, say, 100,000 words, it is possible that you're trying to do too much and bake too many stories into a single novel. And in some cases, it might actually better serve the story you are trying to tell if you omit one or more of the storylines. It's something that I see a lot, and if you fall into this boat, do not feel bad because it's almost like a bonus. You just have an extra novel on top of the novel you thought you already wrote. So it's a 2-for-1 deal. It is an edit that I have made several times when I am working on a structural edit with an author and it's an early draft of the manuscript. We come to the revelation that there really are 2 or even in some cases 3 novels all in one, and in order to give each one its due attention and the time it really deserves, you actually need to break them up. A general rule of thumb is that 2 to 3 storylines tends to be the most manageable for a standard length novel. However, of course, there are exceptions. There are exceptions in even best-selling books out there. So if you have more than 3 storylines, it's not off the table. I would just advise that you proceed with caution and you really ask yourself the hard question of if you have multiple novels in one. You want to make sure that we are able to deeply connect with each storyline and each protagonist without the story becoming overly complex and convoluted. So just think really carefully about why you have the storylines that you do in this novel and really ensure that they do belong together and shouldn't be broken up. I hope these tips help you write a stronger novel that engages the reader from beginning to end through all of its storylines. Let me know in the comments if you are writing or have written a novel with multiple storylines and what challenges that you faced in doing so. And if you're looking for some more tips on structuring your novel, check out my video on different novel structures and the pros and cons of each. I talk a little bit about multiple storylines in that one, as well as other novel structures. And as always, if you found this video helpful, please hit that like button and subscribe to my channel. It helps me know I'm bringing the content that is interesting and helpful to you and allows me to continue growing this channel and community. Thanks so much for watching and happy writing.